All right, this is Wild Nevadacast. I am Dave Santina, and I am sitting across from a familiar person to those of you who watched the series from the beginning back in the olden days, many years ago. Rich Moreno has come to studio and was the guide for 4 episodes of Wild Nevada back in the day. You were on, for those who are tracking with us and would like to watch those episodes, they are episodes 118, 205, 208, and 308, all available online.
I'm glad to see you have that memorized.
I have memorized it to paper. Yeah, but thanks for coming over. It's just cool to see you.
Same.
At the time you were doing the show, you lived here. You were in Carson City, right? You were working as the Nevada
I lived
magazine.
in Reno, and I was a publisher at Nevada Magazine back then. And I actually reached out to you guys when you first started the show and said, hey, can we do some background to help you guys while you're doing your episodes, kind of sweat equity?
Right.
And in return, you'll give us a little teeny credit at the end of the show. And you said, sure.
Yeah, that's when Jack Kelly was producing.
Yeah,
So
it wasn't you, but I mean Jack. Yeah.
See, he negotiated this smartly. I didn't know this was happening. Here I thought he was doing all the research himself.
No. So I actually did most. I don't think I had any other staff people to do it. I just started putting binders together for Jack of potential places where you guys might want to go.
Well, it worked out because we got to go everywhere, and I'm sure that some of the shows that you were hosting with us or guiding with us were shows you had prepped for us too.
Oh,
because
yeah.
we relied heavily on every guide to help us make plans. We were never the experts. That was the point.
Right.
That we wanted everybody who could go out, who could watch us go and explore, do the same thing, and feel like that it was pretty well curated. So yeah, you took us on ghost town visits to Candelaria and Manhattan. I still remember Manhattan.
I remember Manhattan, yeah.
I'll always remember the beer truck showing up in the middle of what I thought was nowhere, Manhattan, Nevada, where there were, I think, 2 active bars.
Oh, yeah,
in a town of, it looked like 15 people max, and 2 bars that were living at the time.
Yep.
That was nuts. And the beer truck shows up to supply them while we're trying to shoot in the silence of this ghost town.
And it's my understanding that Manhattan was basically like a vacation town for people who live in Tonopah.
Okay.
A getaway place.
Nice. Well, I always will remember that. That was a fun show, and that was when we saw this. You introduced us to the Sump, which was a place that I'd never imagined. And
not very many people are aware of it. It was a woman from Goldfield who told me about it years before, and the name isn't exactly something that makes you, it's not like, Paradise of the Gods or one of these places, natural places that people talk about, the Sump. And so it is like a big natural toilet, so we...
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, and it is. It's a drainage area, basically. But yeah, we went there and we found all the petrified tree stumps and... the rock formations, etc.
And colors.
And
wild colors that I never had seen before in nature like that. It was really an eye-opener. So I was grateful that that was one of those places that I always think about when I talk about having produced or worked on this show for years and being grateful for the experience, because I never would have gone there. I probably will never go back because... I don't even have a vehicle that I would trust to drive in there because it was a rough go.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
in
rough
fact,
road.
You have to drop down kind of like a cliff to get into like a dry wash to cross over to find the road.
Yeah. So I really appreciated that you introduced us to that place. So,
well, and I had gone out there once before. So I was, unfortunately, we did have a vehicle, high clearance truck at the time. And so I'd been out there with my family, and I knew it was doable, that you weren't going to die out there.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
I loved it, and I always remember it. And so that's the beauty of doing that show for me, was being able to see all these places that I never would have seen.
Sure.
You took us. Our first ever geocache was with you.
First time I'd ever heard of it.
Yeah.
When you guys handed me that little yellow GPS device, I'm like, what the hell is this thing? And it was fun. We went to Davie Town. My recollection was the ghost town that we...
Right.
And I found the cache, and then Jack made us, because it's television.
Yeah.
We had to go back and reenact the discovery after I'd found it.
That's right.
Yeah. So it was underneath some like metal
some sheet
debris,
metal or
sheet
something.
metal.
Yeah. So if you're listening, then you'd like to see that our great acting as we discover for the second time the geocache. Go to episode 205 on pbsreno.org or on the PBS app, and you can watch Wild Nevada. Again, those episodes were 118, 205, 208, and 308. Silver City and Gold Hill was 208, where as we were sitting down to start this recording, you introduced me to the reality of that show.
Yeah, I was sitting at work and I got a call from Jack Kelly, who was the producer at the time, and he said, "Hey, we're going to be shooting." I think it was actually a day in advance.
Okay.
Actually, I was probably exaggerating when I told you, but it was not a big time frame. And he's like, "Hey, tomorrow we're going to be in Virginia City. Can you come on up and do this episode?" And so I think I dressed appropriately so that I could, and then when because obviously I sat around in my underwear at work. No,
of course.
And so then I went there and we taped that, and that was a lot of fun. And fortunately, I knew enough about Virginia City not to sound like a moron.
Yeah, so, it was Silver City and Gold Hill. We walked through that day.
Right.
I made notes because I wanted to review. I wanted to go back. It's been 20 plus years.
Exactly.
So I wanted to go back and see what was it we actually did, because it's been a while. And I remember that day for reasons that are appropriate as we're recording on a day that's over 100 degrees. It was hot that day, and we walked up and down the street and total exposure.
Yeah.
For a couple hours, and it was toasty. And I still remember the heat of Silver City and Gold Hill from that day. It was probably 2003 or something.
Yeah, that's about the right time.
Yeah, and so it was a memorable day for me for that reason. I didn't realize the short notice that.
Yeah, I just remember I didn't have a lot of prep time for that one. I think the first one. That one that you're talking about, the Ghost Town one, we actually met at Walker Lake, right?
Yeah, we started the show at Walker Lake.
That was the first time I ever was on the show. I was so nervous. TV is not. I'm a writer. TV was not something I was totally familiar with. I'd done news talk shows where you're the guest and people just ask you questions, you answer, and
that's it.
It was kind of hard to get used to the idea of like staring into that little round lens and pretending that you're talking to somebody out there.
Right. It is weird.
It is very weird.
It takes some getting used to. And I remember with the very first show we ever did of the whole series it was a pilot in 2000. I think it was August we shot it. And I remember Chris Orr saying later that she imagined her mom or her boyfriend, depends on, I think, the day, who was behind that lens, so she could talk to him, and that made it okay, because it was awkward and weird to talk to a camera.
Yeah, it is, especially if you've not done it.
Yeah.
So
now now I don't think she cares who's behind it.
Yeah.
Now she can do it without even thinking about it. But this was 24 years ago, so it was just like, wow.
Well, we were all kids.
We're making up a show. We're just Jack Kelly had an idea and we're like, let's go do it. So we just made it up, and who would have expected that we're talking about it now, 24 years later, 23?
Sure.
It's crazy, but it's lasted, and I think that's great. I'm grateful for that.
Well, I think it's lasted because you and Chris really make the show so accessible. When you go to places, you show what you can do there. And you're not like strapping on, hardcore mountain climbing gear and saying we're going to the top of, some peak. You're showing things you can drive up, you can hike. It might take a little while, but they're things real people can do. And I think that's the strength and the beauty of Wild Nevada.
Agreed. And the new season that Chris is working on is, I think, going to be similar, but also have some new tweaks to it, because she's producing that whole series. So I think people will have something different to look forward to, and I think they'll like it. And now I wanted to catch up with you. Since this is 20 years ago we're talking about, you have gone through a whole bunch of life changes since then. Yeah,
I left Nevada Magazine. I went to Illinois for about 9 years and taught journalism and advised a student newspaper at Western Illinois University. And then, about 8 years ago, my wife and daughter and I moved up to Washington State I got a job at Central Washington University. So, but I have continued to write about Nevada in my book projects. And I still have family here. For a while, we owned properties still, and actually we still do in the state. So we come back frequently, and so I it kept my my Nevada tie, my Nevada-ness, fresh.
Your roots are not severed.
No,
here.
no, and when we left, we knew that was going to be the case. Even though, God, we're going on 20 years we've been gone. Our plans, actually, not to jump way to the future, we do hope to move back when my wife retires in about 3 years. My daughter's now living here, married, and so we're our plans are to come back to Reno.
Nice. It's funny to hear about your daughter being married.
Well, I know she was in an episode.
She was in an episode. She's this little kid.
Yeah,
and I see that then and think that does not compute. That's now an adult who is married. I feel old when I see that. So you mentioned your book projects. You've written a lot of books,
like 14. Yeah,
yeah, and they're a lot of Nevada stories, history, some straight history, some sort of fun sort of myth busting or storytelling about the sort of the lore of the state and just straight travel trips too. Like some of the stuff that I think I have a copy here of backyard travels in northern Nevada, which was
it's like my first book.
Yeah, and that was I think a resource for Wild Nevada for a long time.
I think I saw a copy on Jack's shelf.
This is it.
Oh, okay.
This copy, I'm pretty sure, is the one that was here then. And so if you look through that book, and then you also wrote a follow-up later.
Actually, I did. Those were books I wrote for the Children's Museum in Carson City as fundraisers.
Oh, funny.
I was writing a column for the newspaper in Carson City called The Backyard Traveler, and I'd been doing it for years. And they came to me and said, "Hey, can we collect those into a book and as a fundraiser?" And I had never had a book published, so sure. So it was great. I got published. They got all the money, and I think we printed 5,000 that first one, and they sold out. And they subsequently kept reprinting it. And then I did a follow up. I think it was More Backyard Travels or something like that.
Yeah. I actually wrote it down. The Backyard Traveler returns.
Yes, that's right.
And that was southern and eastern and parts of Nevada. So
they were all basically my columns, but then repurposed with more of a narrative thread. And then there was a third book, which was, I think, I forget what that one was called. You probably have it on your list.
You've got Nevada trivia. You've got
myths
and legends.
Those came later.
Roadside history of Nevada. I've written down some of them just to kind of remind myself of just how prolific you have been over the years with these Nevada stories. It feels like you never left. Like you're still writing fresh content about the state. Your latest book is one that I've been going through, which is really fascinating and fun. Frontier Fake News. That's Nevada's sagebrush humorists and hoaxsters, and I've been running through that and really enjoying reading these stories of what I didn't realize was sort of an active, conscious effort to write hoax stories in media back in the 1800s, roughly, and how common it was. I had no idea that was so common. I mean, I'd read occasional columns here and there, doing a research for some documentaries, and you'd see sort of a fun column.
Well, people knew about Twain's, Petrified Man or something like that.
Yeah, Mark Twain, Dan DeQuille.
Right.
Those are two people who you highlight in chapters. They get their own chapters. Mark Twain you call the humorist. Dan DeQuille you call the master.
Right, because he actually wrote the better ones, I think.
Oh, really?
Twain, in his, not to get into the depth of the book, but he often had a axe to grind. And so he would incorporate real people in his hoaxes as a way of getting back at people that he was trying to make a point about. Some judge he didn't like or other figure. DeQuille was just straight on parody. I mean, when he writes about solar armor, that supposedly, it's an armor made out of sponges that you can go out in the desert and it keeps you cool so you don't, die of thirst.
Okay.
But in the story, the guy sets the the dial or whatever he has on it too high, and he freezes to death in the desert. So, his stuff was just classic, and a lot of science related, which is just believable enough, especially in the late 19th century, where, when a lot of people weren't schooled, and he wrote in a really compelling way, and you're reading it, and it's like, so the magnetic forces of the earth can make this happen, great stuff. And there were others. Fred Hart was in Austin doing kind of the same thing. He created an entire club and printed in his newspaper the minutes of the club, but it didn't exist.
It was the
Sazerac Lying Club. And of course, the joke is the whole thing was a lie. So, excuse me. So he was another one. And there were others who just dabbled. There was a guy up in Tuscarora named John Dennis who only ever wrote one hoax. And it was about I think it was called the Illuminated Tree or something. And it was about a tree out in Tuscarora.
Phosphorus tree,
yes,
right?
It had a phosphorus material and it glowed in the night, and the Native Americans worshipped it. And he wrote it. And generally they wrote these things because it was slow news day. And in those days, newspapers, sure, they were about news, but they were also about entertainment. And so they had poetry, short stories, recipes. I mean, all kinds of things were in the paper, along with a ton of ads.
Okay.
And so it was a way, like sometimes these mining towns, there'd be a lot going on, and other times nothing. And so you got a hole. What do? Hey, I think I'll write about a fake tree that glows in the dark.
It's like fictional. It's like it's almost like a literary experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing about Dennis, John Dennis, was that he later wrote, he regretted writing it because he kept getting asked about that story for the rest of his life by other people. And then he wrote a story about it's one of the earliest transgender stories I've ever read in the 19th century. There was a true story of a woman who pretended to be a man who was a minor who got married, and people thought that was a hoax.
Oh, wow.
So he's like, hey, wait, it's one of those truth is stranger than fiction type things. But he did an article late in life where he kind of compared. People believed my nonsense story, but my real story they don't believe. So, but these guys were pretty erudite for the times. They were creative, and I really enjoyed digging into the 8 or 10 or 12 folks that are in that particular book. Yeah,
you talk about them being erudite and the sort of a higher level of writer maybe. And
they're known as the Sagebrush School, kind of collectively.
Yeah, and there's a professor from Lawrence Burkove from University of Michigan Dearborn who loved those writers and did some research on them, and you mentioned him in your book. And I wrote a quote down from him. The Sagebrush authors didn't invent the literary hoax, but they did nurture it into fine art.
I would agree.
That's interesting to think about. It's so hard to imagine in today's world that you could put stories into a newspaper that were entirely made up.
Oh, sure.
And people reading it probably were aware of it at some level and didn't take it so seriously.
Yeah, I don't think people believed a lot of what Twain would write. I mean, they'd write, he'd cover the legislature. They'll read, But a lot of the writing in that time was very personal anyway. Twain going to the legislature wasn't just like reading an AP story about a legislative hearing. It was him saying, sitting in the back of the room and Senator such and such looked like it had a little too much last night to drink. And, there was a lot of personal observation, reflection in there.
They injected their own real personalities into it was their experience of the legislature versus a straight facts-only coverage of this is what happened today. Yeah,
and so it was a whole different style of writing than we're kind of used to. I in the course of writing this, I was surprised at how many different people. I knew about Fred Hart, and I knew about some of the, obviously Twain and DeQuille, but there were others as I started getting into it. John Dennis, as I mentioned, was one. William Forbes, who wrote puns.
And he used a nom de plume, right? Semblance.
Yes, they a lot of them. Twain obviously he used pen names,
and so
and DeQuille. That
DeQuille.
His real name is William Wright, which DeQuille was a pun.
The pen, right?
The pen. So Fred Hart was his real name, but he actually used a pen name when he covered the state legislature for the the Austin newspaper, the Reese River Reveille. So. That was not uncommon that you did, and I think it's because it freed you up to be a smartass.
Right? Yeah.
You could write things under a pen name and felt liberated a little bit. So I think there was an element of that, but it was also pretty common. Actors did it. Everyone kind of had a public name and then a private name when you were in that entertainment field.
So it wasn't just Nevada where this was happening.
No, there was some in Eastern California, and then it had happened earlier in the early part of the 1800s in New York. There were a number, and I write the opening chapter is really in the book is about where hoaxes started. Benjamin Franklin created an entirely fake newspaper that he printed in Paris and distributed to try to get France's support for the Revolutionary War. So he made it up, this whole paper, and it was a nonsense paper name, but they believed it. They thought it was a real American newspaper that he was handing out to diplomats, et cetera. And so there was this tradition of mostly for kind of political reasons, but then New York, the New York Sun primarily. Baltimore paper had done it. Edgar Allan Poe had written a hoax. When science became kind of a thing where people, a flying balloon, things like that, it became easier to then take and say, yes, and a man flew a balloon all the way to the moon, or the one story about the scientist who had the telescope where he could see bat people on the moon.
Right.
So yeah, there were these stories that appeared. One of the classics was in one of the New York papers where they talk about the zoo having a rampage where the animals all got free, and you read it, it's huge. It's a long, long story. It must be 40 inches long in the paper.
Wow.
And it's filled with carnage. The apes ripped the guy's arm off. And I mean, it's just so
lurid.
And then you get to the end and it says none of this happened. But the zoo is in really bad shape. And the purpose of this is to point out that we need to spend more money on how we treat our animals.
Wow. So yeah, there was a purpose behind them.
Exactly.
And it sounds like the newspapers of the day were almost more like a Reader's Digest type of entertainment and news, not just hard news issues. So that, if I think about it like that, I can imagine it in the spirit in which it was intended, and I could imagine people reading it and maybe being a little more discerning. Maybe we need that today. Maybe people need something to lighten them up a little bit when they read their news, if they're reading news, and recognize that there are points of view beyond your own. And, and read something humorous that might enlighten you, or maybe make you think. Or read something full of animal carnage from the zoo that then tells you this isn't true, but I just want you to think about this, and maybe don't take it quite so seriously, or at least be aware of an issue and from a perspective that isn't your own.
Oh, sure.
I think that would be very valuable today.
I would agree. I think so. I think, if we could take things a little less seriously sometimes, it might be advantageous to the world.
I agree. Well, that's why I'm here, to try to take things a little less seriously. Well, thank you for describing that. I think that this was really a fun book to read. I presume that it's available everywhere books are available.
Oh, yeah. It's any local bookstore, Amazon. The University of Nevada Press published it. It's on their website. It's available pretty much anywhere you want to find it.
Cool. That's Frontier Fake News, Nevada's Sagebrush Humorists and Hoaxsters by Richard Moreno. I always just say Rich because we always just knew you as Rich.
Yeah, you see on the books, I always use my
You're so formal.
formal name. Yeah.
You're such a formal guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that, and I appreciate you coming in and talking about this. And are there any more books in the works?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a Washington book. I don't know what the title's going to end up being, but it's basically 50 places that are on the National Register of Historic Places in the state of Washington. It's part of a series that this publisher I'm doing it for. They started in Montana with a book called Historic Places in Montana or something like that.
Okay.
And I suspect that'll be similar, what they'll call it. So yeah, I got another year to finish it, and I'm about maybe 60% through it because I have to visit all 50 of these places and take my own photos. So I, you got to look at what time of day do I get there. Are there wildfires, which blows half the summer usually,
Right.
And so it'll take about 2 years to put that together, mostly because of the photos. Just trying to get days with either good clouds or blue skies. But yeah, I'm going to head out in August to Spokane
Okay.
and kind of hit some of the eastern side of Washington. And then I have I hope another Nevada book coming out. It's on historic influencers in Reno. It's on about 10 or 12 folks who had an influence on the way Reno developed. Again, for the university, well, hopefully for the University of Nevada Press. So that's a book that's actually done that I'm just kind of fine tuning with the folks. And I hope that'll be out in the next year.
That would be wonderful. So
Yeah.
then we can talk about that one.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You covered fake news and now influencers. You're keeping it.
Well,
keeping it relevant.
That was actually the purpose. Yeah, when the title for Frontier Fake News actually came to me in, like all good ideas, in the shower. I was wanting to write something about the Sagebrush School and humorous, etc., and I couldn't come up with a hook, an angle, and then Donald Trump got elected, and there was all these charges of fake news, fake here, fake that. And as I was showering, all of a sudden it was like, Frontier Fake News. There it is.
Perfect.
It's right there in front of me. So, yeah, that's where that came from. And then when I was working on this other Reno book, I called it, in the beginning, I think I tentatively called it Reno Characters. You know, it had different blah names. Then for a while, I was sold on wanting to make it kind of sound sensational. I was going to call it Reno Confidential. But they really weren't people, that were involved with, there's a few that, McGramm and McKay and Graham, who were involved with crime in the city, that are in there. But that didn't really fit. And then kind of, I was looking at Frontier Fake. I said, hey, what about influencer? So, and they like that idea. So I kind of look at them as companion things in some ways.
I think that's great. They feel relevant no matter what era they were talking about.
Sure.
You're bringing them in front of people in a way that immediately connects us to what those subjects meant to their audience at their time relative to what we look at today.
Right.
So I think that's brilliant. I'm looking forward to that one.
Well, I'm too. I'm looking forward to it coming out. So yeah, because they're all, they're your babies.
Sure.
And sometimes it takes time to birth them.
I understand. It's painful. I understand. All right. So, how could people be in touch or follow you? Are you in the world of social media? Are you an influencer, Rich Moreno?
I am not on TikTok, but I do have a blog. It's called Nevada. What is it called? Nevada Travels and Beyond, and it's on a Blogger. And so I have that. I think if you type in my name and put Nevada Traveler in, it comes up. And that's where I post updated versions of like a lot of my columns that I used to write, actually still do. I have a column that still appears in the Lahontan Valley News in Fallon, and comes out weekly, and gives me another excuse to come down to Nevada to get new material. So like yesterday, I was in the 104-degree heat. I decided to hike the Wedekind Regional Park.
Okay.
Looking for any remains for Wedekind City, which is a mining town that once existed just outside of Sparks. And I saw a video on YouTube. Some guy had gone out and done history with store photos, etc. A place I'd never heard of. And I thought, hey, I'm here. I'm in town. It's 104. I think I'm going to go out there. And so I was out hiking the dry, treeless hills, Wedekind Hills, for about 2 hours yesterday.
Well done.
So I'm surprised I'm not more good sunscreen.
Yeah, you look preserved well, and no.
Well, I went
burn.
early, so that helped.
Smart.
Yeah.
Well done. Well, so that's something to look forward to keep following the columns.
Yeah, if you pick up the Lahontan Valley News,
all right,
you'll be able to see that in the future.
I love it. All right, well, I will look for that. I'm familiar with those trails, so I will follow to find that article. I look forward to reading it. Okay, well, thank you, Rich. For you listeners, viewers, watch Wild Nevada. Still can watch it on PBS Reno via broadcast or live stream, or on pbsreno.org. Or you can watch it on the YouTube channel, PBS Reno's YouTube channel. Now, if you have a question about Wild Nevada, or maybe a comment or a suggestion for the show, for Chris on the Wild Nevada TV series, for me on the Wild Nevadacast, send them to me at podcasts@pbsreno.org. I want to say thank you to Rich Moreno for coming in and giving us the time today, and thank you guys for listening to Wild Nevadacast.